there's so much that I love about making Folio, but it is a very isolated experience.
Yeah.
And having a project where I get to like be on a call with other human beings and then we like have a shared experience is like, wow, this is nice.
I'm glad we can do that for you.
Yeah. Welcome to This Should Be a Game, a podcast about adaptive media and filtering 90% of your life experiences through tabletop role-playing games. I'm Satah, they, them. You can find me on Bluesky at posatachips.gaygothvibes.online, or you can check out my website at gaygothvibes.online. I am still here in mission control, and I haven't heard from Jess in a while, but I'm confident that she's handling stuff fine out there in the black. Jess, where can people find you?
People can find me somewhere in space. I don't really have a point of reference, which is a problem, but you can also find me at jessfrom.online on Bluesky and my website, jessfrom.online. You can also find all my games at jumpgate.games or jumpgategames.itch.io, because I'm usually in space, often in space.
And of course, we have Dee, who has been sitting with me in engineering this whole time, just really trying to keep everything together, mitigate some of these crises, and we're trying our best. Where can people find you?
Hi, you can find me at deecity.itch.io. I have some games there. Also at galpalgames.itch.io, which is where some things that I make with my wife are. Or you can find me on Bluesky at Queen Regnant.
Beautiful. All right. My brain snapped into folio mode and I was like, I know these plugs. I've said these plugs a lot of times. So this is the second episode in our series where we are using the 2013 movie Gravity as a jumping off point to design a TTRPG with a few cool people. Dee, would you mind giving us just a 30-second-ish summary of the movie, sort of as you experienced it?
I will do my best. So Sandra Bullock plays Ryan, who is on her first space mission, and she's very nervous and very sick. And then a disaster leaves her stranded in space alone with another astronaut, Matt, who is, of course, played by George Clooney. He talks to her to keep her calm. They bond a little bit. Eventually, she shares that she lost her young daughter, and she has nothing to go home to. Eventually, Matt has to sacrifice himself so that Ryan can live, and he makes her promise that she'll keep going no matter what. But challenges keep mounting, and she almost gives up in this peaceful moment. But her connection with Matt and a conversation that she has with a man on Earth on the radio, even though they don't speak the same language, helps keep her going. And she makes it back to Earth, and in the final shot, she laughs as she struggles to stand in gravity.
Oh, beautiful. Absolutely. Yeah, I think the thing that I noticed specifically that I really liked how you summarized it was the relational thing between George Clooney and Sandra Bullock, of him keeping her calm, and that she has these moments of calm based on communication with other people. There's George Clooney, and then there's the person whose language she doesn't even speak, who she can barely actually communicate with, as sort of very central moments in her arc in an emotional way.
Human connection being the only thing that keeps us alive in difficult situations.
Yeah. And that feels really perfect for, I think, kind of where we left off. So we had our first episode on this movie with Will Yobst, and we came up with kind of an overall game structure. And I have a couple different avenues that I'd love to guide us down for how we can keep fleshing that stuff out, especially happen to, in this specific instance, know pretty well, like, what some of your strengths are as a designer, Dee, just knowing, like, some of the stuff you might be interested in. But before we kind of get into that, Jess, could you catch Dee up on just what we came up with last episode?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes perfectly with some of the stuff you called out in your summary, because you're going to find a couple elements that stood out to you also stood out to us. So we have set up a game that is sort of a series of mini games, almost Mobile Frame Zero Firebrand style collection of mini games, where each of you are astronauts on a space mission in an escalating series of crises and disasters. The game text itself is sort of an imitation manual, like they had on board the Soyuz, having to move through, and that is a collection of mini games that involve some level of timed challenges or puzzles. You might have like 5 minutes on the clock, and when that 5 minutes runs out, you have to roll to find out what minigame you're going to be facing. If you do well, it's not a big deal. You're installing a comm system or something like that, and just getting to know each other and learning a bit about your characters and learning of the mechanics. As the game goes on, you're more and more likely to roll crises, which are mini games where you're facing some intense time pressure and risk, and your characters start to run the risk of dying in these scenarios. These mini games might involve like dexterity challenges or puzzling through. You might have to like roll dice and land them on the rulebook in a certain way, or like arrange them in a crossword with the right numbers, or like flip through the book and find the information you need and match dice to different places, all with this timer ticking down like the debris orbiting every 90 minutes. However, to get at these elements of human connection, there are a couple mechanics that we talked about it both at the beginning when you're doing those sort of lower intensity non-crisis mini games. You're getting hit with prompts about like, what was your life on Earth before this? What brings you up here? What do you like about this? And you're answering those in that time period. And as you start to move into crisis, as you drew attention to human connection being what keeps us going, we talked about the idea of in some way being able to cheat by engaging in those moments of connection. And so, for example, a dead player might be able to pause the timer and say to you, "What's the saddest you've ever been?" And then you have to answer that. And Satah had the great idea of, as long as you keep talking, you can keep rolling dice as many times as you want to get the result you need. You gotta pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time, answering the question. And then that person might also be able to change the result of your dice or something like that by coming to you as a hallucination, and then they get to like fix your die result or something like that. All these different ways that you can help save someone by demonstrating your emotional connection and their emotions in the situation and their backstory. And so I feel like there's a really interesting intersection between all of the fiddly bits that we already started with in the puzzle mechanics and how we bring the emotion and the human connection as a way to solve dilemmas and solve problems here.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that it both, like, I think the thing that I was consciously choosing not to include in my summary because 30 seconds is tight, is that it is like it's such a tense movie, right? Like it really ratchets, it controls tension very, very well. But I remember when I first saw it in theaters, I thought of Die Hard when I walked out, right? Because it has that just like really like masterful control of like, you get really tense and then you have a moment to relax and you get really tense again. It carries you through very well. So I love the focus on time and constraint. And then I think it really does map very well to a lot of like, I think two of the best like they're not even action sequences. Two of the best sequences are like when at the very beginning when George Clooney is talking her through how to help him find her, rather. Yeah. And there's that, like, give me cardinal points, and she has to think through what that means, and she's able to do it eventually. And then obviously, like, the sort of deus ex machina of her low oxygen hallucination where he's literally just like, you should go home. Yeah. Don't you want to go home? And she's like, oh yeah, I do. It feels like it really masterfully captures both of that ends, both those like emotional escapes and also the just like the constant tension of it.
Yeah, I think that it's really exciting to try and find the ways that we can carry specific parts of the vibe, especially turning such a, as we have talked about in the first episode, such a solitary movie turning into a group experience, specifically by having it so that at the very beginning, probably everyone is playing a character. And then when you die, you pick up something else. You're now embodying depleted oxygen, or you are embodying the rotating debris or something, and that kind of thing. And you can bring your dead character back to help, but you're also very slowly just whittling down this experience until a lot of people are embodying the universe more than they're embodying a specific character. We're all just trying to get this one person home safe.
Oh, I love that. I that's a very good, like, I know that we're all fans of the belonging outside belonging games, and I feel like that captures that aspect of it very well, of the, like, just having authorship over the world as well as over the person that you are, and that leading to a new kind of storytelling experience for the people you're playing with. I also really like the emphasis that you are putting on how absent people can still have a big impact, because, like, even when she's with George Clooney at the beginning, like, they're not really ever present together, right? They're always mediated. Like, very often, even in their most intimate conversations, they can't look at each other because of how they're traveling through space. So it's great. I'm excited to get into it.
Yay! Cool. Well, I would love to hear if you have a specific sort of avenue that you're immediately pulled to. I would love to hear that. If not, I think a very natural next step here is laying some groundwork on just what does it mean to build a character? Who are these people? What are some of the questions that we ask to find out their relationships to each other? Or what are the little prompts, the sort of, the very thinking a lot about the things that Clooney's character asks. I will just truly never remember either of their names. I mean, Ryan Stone is a great name, but still Sandra Bullock to me. But the ways that he will go, like, he notices that she's nervous and he goes, "So what is it you like about being in space?" And makes her answer. And then, just those little expositional character buildy questions. I would love to start, like, narrowing in on some of those. And there's also the element, the idea of those, like, crisis and situation prompts. And I just know that, Dee, so often when I've heard you, like, play games or read games that you've worked on, you have done a lot of, like, really interesting sort of, like, relational work, and so I'm very interested in, like, talking through some of that with you. But again, if there is something that hopped out at you that you would rather dive in on, I'm down. I think that we have a cool little structure.
I'm very happy to do that.
Awesome.
But believe me, I'm very happy to talk about the relational stuff.
Yeah.
And you're actually, so something I noticed this time watching, this was my second time seeing it, but it had been a long time. I think I saw it when it was in theaters. Something I noticed this walkthrough that I think would be great to capture in the relational things, the relational aspects and sort of the character building aspects, is that she very specifically takes on mannerisms of his as she moves through the film. There's a moment at the end where, I can't remember exactly where it is, but she makes he tells her at the beginning, like, you should keep transmitting even if you don't think anybody can hear you. And there's a moment at the end, she does that periodically throughout the movie, and there's a specific moment right towards the end where she says something, she does that, and then at the end she says, "Roger that," as though she'd gotten a response back, which is exactly what he does at the beginning, when he's sort of telling, like, NASA, who can't hear him, what's going on, and he just kind of assumes they're in conversation. And that was something that stood out to me, that she sort of takes on some of his habits, and I think that that would be a great lens to look at character creation through, of, like, that there are things that you can discreetly take on from somebody else, maybe when they do something especially meaningful to you, or when they are gone, so that they sort of keeps moving through the story in some way.
Yeah, I noticed, there's also a specific, like, he's always anecdotes just constantly, and near the end she she does a couple of the same things. Like she suddenly pulls up a story from her life.
Yeah.
And that is
Absolutely.
so lovely.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is so cool to call out. And like, I made a note, I think one of the early instances of this that's a little more of like a professionalized version of it and becomes more personal, where I literally, it's written down, Ryan switches over to being the one to have professional comms. Like she starts saying,
Right.
Houston in the blind, I am doing this.
Yeah.
When before she had been like, why are you still talking to them? In the blind is not a turn that she was using until she loses him and has to become him. And at first it's procedural, and then it becomes personal. Then it's not just the professional comms, it's also the anecdotes, and it's also, and I think it's so cool to see you turn that into a longer narrative. And I think you're so right, and it speaks to, in character creation, we should be thinking about like what elements are characters composed of, such that you can tease out some of those things and bring them back later. I'm thinking of, there's different approaches to character creation where you have like playbooks that are really holistic, or composition where you're taking a bunch of disparate elements and putting them together. And they aren't totally separate, but I love the idea of thinking about playbooks as composed of pieces such that you can borrow and pull upon those pieces in natural ways.
Yeah. So something that I've done in Drink My Sweat, one of my games, and this is, I can't surface one of the specific mechanics, but there's definitely things like this in going rogue, particularly with some of the playbooks that are very intertwined, is the idea of in creation you are determining things about other characters as well as about yourself. And I think that what might be most appropriate for this game is that you have total ownership of creation at the beginning, but then you're going to like have mechanical choices to pass elements to other players as you get to the later phases of the game.
I also want to draw upon, for another of my games I have, the high ground, something Satah actually helped me design for it, is the idea that there are these pairs of opposite descriptors for your characters. So like impulsive versus like planned, or like wizened versus like fresh, and you use them to describe how your characters are foils to each other and how they're opposites. You pick one that you share, one like word that you share, one pair of opposites that you're different about, and then two individual ones. And so the idea of intentionally at the beginning picking out some ways of being different or opposites so that you are set up to bridge that gap as you go could also be really interesting.
I really like that. And then potentially, I think there's a really interesting opportunity of like what if you have to become the synthesis, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if it's street smart, and book smart, right? And then like maybe wise is the synthesis of those two things, right? Like something to you, like when you combine an element, it can evolve. Like sometimes it might just be that you are taking on an aspect of somebody else that will be helpful to you, or just that keeps you connected to them. And sometimes it can be actually like that is advancement, that because you take in more than one perspective, that allows you to sort of get to another level.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me, of like there's such a fun themey science thing there, you're doing chemistry basically. With a bunch of elements. And I love the idea that like every part of your character sheet is a resource that you can give to somebody. Ooh. And it probably leads you to self-sacrifice at a certain point, but the idea that like something as literal as I'm going to give you my oxygen tank, right? There's that, but there's also like I'm going to give you my quirk, I'm going to give you my like coin flipping quirk, and in some way you can use that to overcome a challenge, and then that is just something that is true of that character for the rest of time, that like they now have this little quirk of like fiddling with a coin that they've like adopted from someone else. And that's probably something that it's, an emotional resource, thinking of lowering stress levels and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like that's, that we see that in the movie, right? Yeah. Like when she when she starts to say, it's so funny because like I love that even at the end she's sort of like, did you hear the one about this? And then she's kind of like, forget this story because she's still Ryan Stone, right? Like she's not going to be garrulous in exactly the same way, but she still like she definitely gets like something very strong out of that moment. And I think that she like in a similar way, there's it's so touching how she's affected by hearing a dog and a baby from the sort of mysterious broadcaster. And that feels like it's something similar, right? Yeah. That it's like in some way he is giving her his baby, right? Yeah. He's giving her his dogs. God, when she just like lies back and is like, make your dogs bark for me again. I was like, oh, Ryan, Sandra.
Yes,
I was so surprised by how like many little moments where this movie really got me. Yeah. Like I know that people love this movie. I'd never seen it before. And, you know, even George Clooney was working for me in this movie. Like 5 minutes in, I was like, yeah, damn it, you care. I trust you.
With great reluctance.
Like, so just those little moments.
It's a very exquisitely crafted movie, right? Like it feels like they thought about every line, and every line is setting something up or is like calling something to mind for you. So, you know, like I to me it's not like a great movie like with a capital G, right? It's not one that like sort of sets like I don't know, like it doesn't say something very profound because it's very simple and it's something that you've heard before, but it just does it so well, you know?
Yes,
like it just,
exactly.
It just does what it does perfectly. And that's true on both like a tension thrill ride level and also like an emotional thematic level. I'm curious, as we talk about sort of elements of character, is there a sort of clear enough mechanical framework of like what kinds of resources you might be winning with a character trait? Like what kinds of advantages a character trait would give you?
Not in a super defined way. I think that we can, at least as a baseline, just look at what resources are constantly under threat in the movie. So oxygen, fuel, stability, of like stress. Yeah. But even and I think that there are a lot of avenues here that can get more and more abstract, like literal stability. Balance is one. How fast you're rotating, like angle of attack. There's all these, and I think that we can sort of like look really broadly and then narrow in on what we actually want to control from this avenue. Like, what is a resource? The idea of like your angle being a resource is interesting, but does it work?
Right.
I don't think necessarily, but I think it's like fun to like, you know, tease that out.
That gives me an idea. A distinction between universal and minigame specific resources. So,
sure.
Your Will had the great idea of calling your character like playmat your HUD. You've got your HUD that represents the current state of your character in front of you, and then something like shared in the middle for everyone. And your HUD, you're tracking oxygen, fuel, and stress. And then in a given scenario, you might in the middle be tracking your character's angle or distance or the strength of their tether,
of like the ship.
Yes, exactly.
Kind of
you have your spacewalk packs fuel, and then that's different than, or even really the only two constants really I would say are oxygen and stress, because everything else is situation dependent. That has a nice duality to it also, because so many of our games also include dice and include using the dice on your HUD to do something to the game. And thinking about like you could literally on your HUD have a little column where your set of polyhedral dice are sitting, and that's your oxygen. Or your stress is taking slots away where you don't have dice anymore. And so you can physically depict those resources that are also what you're using for the game mechanics. And then when someone is helping you, they can affect your HUD in that way. And so, like, again, spitballing here, if you want to affect stress, you're doing these narrative things where you're giving them elements of who you are as a person, and you're asking them these questions, and that can like adjust how stress sits on their HUD. If you sacrifice yourself, you can give them resources. You can give them oxygen. You can give them something concrete. And so you have these different ways of helping different resource types. And then within a given scenario, that mini game might define more specific rules for how you can like. Will was very into like a little bullseye in the center, and you're like on quadrants and you're trying to like move around. And so like you might be able to sacrifice your own position to move their position, just like when he lets go of the tether and that sends her flying back. And so we get these more minigame specific ways of giving resource and sacrificing self. How does that all sit?
I like that a lot, and I like the idea. I think that there's a cool opportunity for the rules of a minigame to set the terms of engagement to some degree, right? Like to say like, you know, a lot to determine about how it exactly would be structured, but it could be like, you know, a living player can give you X kind of resource to give you Y kind of advantage, can give you A kind of resource to give you B kind of advantage, and then same. I like the idea of abstracting it to two items for the overall HUD, and I think that the movie gives us a nice framework for keeping O2 very abstract, because one of the ongoing themes is that everything affects O2, right? So very often he has to say like
totally.
like calm down, like stop exerting yourself, you know, because you're low on O2, and so there's sort of like a nice kind of, you know, you can kind of, there's kind of a narrative excuse for any kind of physical shock or quick action that's needed to deplete O2.
That is actually the reason that I think I would love to find something else other than stress, because stress and oxygen feel like they should always affect each other.
I like that.
And so I'm really curious, like, I'm thinking the first thought I had was just like, will?
Yes.
Like, you think of the moment where she nearly gives up, right? And like that was her willpower just being depleted. And then we have our helpful little vision of him coming in and being like, nope, willpower. Remember this one thing that you only sort of paid attention to in your 6 months of training before we sent you to space?
Oh my God.
You're good.
And we couldn't have designed this last episode because we couldn't have said will over and over again. It would have been confusing. So now we can do it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I love that scene. I just have to shout out that scene for being so bizarre.
I love
right?
that
like
scene.
you're just like, what?
Yeah.
Like why is he there? And it like, you know, I did figure it out. When the first time I saw it, I did figure it out. But the idea of somebody knocking on the outside of this spaceship is so strange.
It's so like scary.
Yes, it's scary.
I like, not knowing very much about the movie, I wasn't sure if we were about, and with, I think we'd already seen the very womb-like shot at that point, very embryonic, and so I was like, are we just doing 2001 Space Odyssey? Like, did she just die and now the rest of this movie is going to be just this weird abstract, your friend can like pop up in the middle of space kind of thing?
That would be a great movie, honestly.
Like, yeah, I think I was so on board. I was like, you know what? I'm ready.
Yeah.
Start throwing imagery at me.
Yes.
Let's go.
That's a great shout out about the embryonic imagery. That's really smart.
Is it willpower, or is there something, because the thing about willpower that is complicated in the context of this movie is that there is also a positive depletion of willpower, which is George Clooney sacrificing himself to save her. That was him being like, this is the end of the line for me.
Okay.
And I also don't necessarily want it to be intrinsically true about all characters that they will give up. You know what I mean? Though I guess that's something that can be handled with different levels of it or something. But yeah, go ahead, Jess.
So, borrowing a couple different things here, thinking about heroic inspiration and gasp Dungeons and Dragons, and thinking about how in going rogue, when you sacrifice yourself, you give all of your outside belonging tokens to someone else. Willpower as rerolls. At any time you can spend a willpower, or a game in the way that Dora labeled might define other ways that you can use willpower. Like, at any time, spend a willpower to do this. and thinking about willpower as a generic resource for use this to push a result, to affect a game in a situation, to come in clutch at a moment that you need it, but it is linearly decreasing until dead players start being able to give you willpower. One, in the act of sacrifice, they pass on all the willpower they've got left, but two, once they are dead, they can start giving you character traits to give you willpower, and you can do these narrative scenes to get willpower. And so oxygen / stress, which is like 1 meter, is maybe a more core component where the like dice are, right? And you are always spending oxygen / stress. And then willpower is a generic resource for affect the outcomes of the other things that are happening, and then can be passed on and granted, unlike oxygen, which mostly is just like you got your tank. It's not like they were able to tank off each other. I actually noticed that. I noted that down, that like he couldn't give her oxygen. There was no way to transfer.
Well, when she gets to 1%, you are like, is he gonna? Because you're just, again, like, it's the tension, right? You're like, there's not enough time. What is he gonna give her oxygen? I really like that, Jess, and I'm not sure if this is the right direction to take that, but it makes me think of the way that some character traits work in 10 Candles, where you have sort of like a physical pile of cards that represent aspects of your character that get sort of spent as a mechanical resource at different times. And there's something that feels right about that. This is very much how I chose to describe it in my summary, actually, right? Like that she lost her daughter, so she has nothing to go home to. Whereas, like, we don't really find out much about Matt's background other than these very surface level stories that he tells, but he clearly is like very determined, right? Like he has a lot inside that is bringing him to get home, and then eventually bringing him to save her. And she, at the beginning of the movie, does not. Like, her tank kind of starts on empty and has to be refilled to some degree. I'm sorry, I'm not necessarily recommending bringing that kind of dynamic into it, where some characters start at a lower level. But I'm literally, like, if you take the idea of the daughter literally, right, that if that daughter was still alive, she would be like, I've got to get home. Yeah. But she, when she talks about, she has that really
it's Tethers.
It's Tethers.
Love those magic moments.
Perfect. It's Tethers.
Yeah.
And Tethers can be represented. Like, we could call it that. And Tethers can be other players, and Tethers can be things that predate this. And you can, when you're out of Tethers, you can give Tethers. Like your connection to these other astronauts can become Tethers when they weren't before.
The idea of, like, you're making this weird web, and you can only move one end of a rope at a time, So let's say you're like, you have a rope that's connecting these two characters in some way, and then it can pivot on one of them. So, like, that connection can be like, either you can, like, break the tether off from one of the characters to connect the other character to a ship or to something like, there's something that's I'm so close to that I just don't quite have. It's something in, like, the way that, okay, is it that are tethers moving and breaking, or are we trying to, I think this is the question. Do we start the game with as many tethers as we will ever have, and we're just moving them around? Or are we creating them? Because one of those is about, like, drawing a web out, and one of them is about centralizing, and you'll hear in how I present it that I'm feeling like it's more thematic, that we are trying to centralize all of the tethers to make sure that one person is strongly, indelibly tethered to Earth, essentially. If we are sort of going in with the assumption that only one person survives.
And we talked last time about the idea that everyone else can die and then the last person can't as a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Dora.
I was just gonna say I really like that. And I think that, like, the one thing I'll say is that maps very well to what we see happen in the movie. That a woman who is untethered, people around her tether her back to Earth, right? Like, that is very much what happens. So, go ahead, Jess.
I am thinking about the idea of like flow, flow of water through a series of gates. And what I mean by that is, what if at first, when you're not tethered to other people, you can't access their resources? But when you tether yourself to someone, the things on their character sheet, on their HUD, are now on yours too, effectively. That tethering gives you access rather than like handing over a piece of your character. When you form a tether by doing an action like this, that person can now pull on what's on your HUD, even if you're dead.
Yeah.
And so by the end, your goal is probably, or not even goal, but just like something you're going to have to do to make it, is tether someone to everyone so they can access everyone's character sheet. And so you might, as you're playing, there might be disparate tethers. There might be like player 1 and 2 are connected, player 3 and 4 are connected. I think it doesn't flow through an intermediary. I think that person needs to be directly tethered to someone else, but you start with 1 and 2 and 3 and 4,
right,
and then 3 dies and that tether stops mattering. So now 3 needs to be connected directly to the last survivor or whatever. Like if 3 and 4 die, 3 needs to be connected to 1. And so it's just setting up this sort of information flow that is the flow of human connection as you need access to more and more people's resources. And if we don't want to limit ourselves to a sort of binary on-off, because that could be tricky, just like you have nothing, now you have everything, and like it doesn't give us multiple points for this to happen. I'm thinking about like once again with the pipes metaphor, like bandwidth, what can fit through. If you have 1 tether, you can only borrow from their character sheet once in a scenario. So if we earlier when I talked about willpower, I talked about a scenario defining here's how you can use willpower. We could also say a scenario defines here's how you use a tether. And then if you have 1 tether, you only get to do that once. But if you have 2 tethers to that person, you can pull on their character sheet and aspects of their character twice in the same scenario.
I think that this raises... First of all, I think that this is great. I think it also... We would have to think about exactly how it works, but I think it opens the door to the game having a built-in pace, which I really like. The idea that at some point you're going to reach the right number of tethers and then play ends somehow, right? That like once you have
absolutely.
One person has maybe it's something like one person has multiple tethers to every other character, living or dead, right? Something like that. It opens the door to that kind of thing, and I feel like you need to massage it to make sure that the math's good, but like to make sure that you wind up with a length that you're happy with. But it feels like it opens the door to that in an interesting way. Do we think that the other thing that tethers do in this movie, which adds a lot of complexity, and I'm not sure it's something that we want to get into, is that they break or they let go?
Yeah, I was thinking about the same thing, because actually like the power of letting go of certain tethers I think is really important.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That actually is a pacing tool in a way that I really like, because you form tethers to living characters to get through things early, and then when you sacrifice yourself, you break tethers to have an even more transformative effect. Use a tether to do this. Break a tether and sacrifice yourself to do this. So tethers can be used by forming them, by using them and they're already formed, or by breaking them. And then it sets up this cycle where you build, break, build. And that, I think, is going to be really helpful for pacing the game. Because then it helps like, we have our introduction section where everyone's meeting each other, they're forming these tethers. Crises start happening and we start breaking them. And then we're down to 1 and they're building, and then they finally have enough to make it home. Does that make sense?
So you rebuild the connections, the tethers that have been broken, and that's specifically sort of how you achieve victory.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. The thing I'm wondering about is that we're creating, and to be clear, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, I actually love it. We're creating a very asymmetrical experience where one character is going to have a different story than all of the other characters.
Mm-hmm.
I've played other games like this. Like, I'm thinking, gosh, is it called The Final Girl? Like,
Satah literally brought up that this is a Final Girl story last episode, and I talked about
Yeah.
how I really wanted this to be an asymmetric game, and so you are identifying.
oh
some
my
important
gosh,
things.
we're doing it. But so I've played a game which I'm not sure it's called The Final Girl, but the structure of it is that you make, I mean, it's like a slasher, right? Like, you make a long list of characters who are very shallowly defined, and then you kill them, right? Situationally, like, you do scenes and you decide who dies in the scenes, and then at the end you wind up with a small number left, and at some point you make the decision that this is the final girl, and so it emerges fluidly from play. So my question is, do we want that to be the experience? Do we want the Sandra Bullock to emerge organically as players make decisions to cut their tethers?
I think generally, yes. I think that I would love if there is still an environmental, there are certain things that are out of your control. I think that, player character death in games is very complicated, and so it isn't something that I would never want to make a game where you can, or I shouldn't say never. For the most part, I wouldn't want to make a game where you can just die without having had a chance to figure out if you were okay with it. But because this is such an uncontrolled environment, I would like it if there was a lot of pressure and that you can't always 100% determine who's going to die next and why. And so I think that should be influenceable. I think that you should be able to, like, make choices that make things more and less likely, but I think that just my personal preference would be to keep a little bit of that unpredictability, a little bit of that, like, you versus the world, you versus the universe aspect of it. But I think that is easily built into what the challenges are and, like, what the scenarios we're setting up are.
The way I was starting to think about it was the idea that in sort of, we had our crisis scenarios and non-crisis scenarios defined, or like mini games. In a non-crisis scenario, you're generally forming tethers, and unless you choose to sacrifice yourself, you generally know I am safe here.
Mm-hmm.
Once you're in a crisis scenario, on Mothership, I changed the rules so that you can never take 2 wounds in a single hit, so that you know when you're on your last legs, because I really like that feeling. You can damage bleeds, but it doesn't take 2 wounds, so you know when you can die. And to get that escalating sense, you have your non-crisis scenarios that are more likely at the beginning. You can't die here. Once you're in a crisis, someone can die. You can sacrifice yourself at any time to improve someone else's result. It's more likely you'll do that in a crisis. And then in a crisis event, if you all don't complete the challenge by the end, someone dies. That could be random, that could be chosen, that could be different scenario to scenario. But basically the outcome is, if you are in a crisis scenario and you do not succeed, and we should make the games challenging enough that that's going to happen sometimes, someone dies. And so it's basically, do you preemptively sacrifice yourself, or do you get to the end?
Right.
And what else that could do is it offers us George Clooney's sacrifice, Kowalski's sacrifice, is interesting because it is not like Satah pointed out in a helpful way that, like, he has a lot of connections. He wants to go home. He doesn't just sacrifice himself out of the goodness of his heart. What he says to her is, I'm pulling you away. You're not securely attached. He knows if he holds on, neither of them are making it. And he knows there's no point in me continuing to hold on. It's not just, I want you to live. It's, I know I'm not going to, but I can save you. And so that, I feel, is almost represented by, you get to the end of a thing, and it's like, okay, we didn't complete the challenge. One of us is not going to make it here. You can give yourself up to make sure your crewmates keep going.
There's, like, you're testing the connections, right? Like, one of the things he says is, like, because he looks at the ropes that are around her boot, and the reason he finally makes the decision of, like, we're not both going to survive is that he's like, you're not connected enough. Like, you're going to slip out of those ropes if my weight is also pulling you. And so he looks at the ways that the different connections are tugging on each other, and he can see that he has to cut off a certain one. That, like, so there's an element of, like, you secure a rope, you secure a tether, and it will be pulled. Maybe you're not pulling it, but, like, someone, something, the universe, the situation, the disaster will be pulling at it. And a lot of the time, it'll be helpful to have a tether because you want to be secured to something. But there will be times when it's holding you back in a dangerous way.
Right.
Fuck,
I wonder,
so good.
this makes me think that, like, this might be pushing it too far, but we could, like, we could use tethers as a language for, like, for everything that you accomplish, like, for challenges as well, right? Because like, especially if you zoom out and you think about it abstractly, right? Like, in the very beginning of the movie, she is untethered and he tethers them with the jetpack, and then she has to, like, the scene we're thinking about is when she is tethered to the ISS and he untethers so that tether will be strong enough. But then if you think about it, like, you know, like, everything can sort of be described that way. Like, the Soyuz is too tightly tethered to the ISS, and she has to loosen that tether, and then
you don't just tether to other players; you tether to the scenario.
Yeah, and to the next thing, right? And then, like, the most abstract is that, like, Soyuz is tethered to the Chinese station by this mission that she goes on, and that tether is way too weak, and she has to find ways to strengthen it.
Yeah.
It might be, like, the thing I worry about there, I think that's a neat framework. It might be overloading the term tether too much if you're thinking about it in all of those ways.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to keep in the back, like, even if that doesn't become literally
true,
I
think we can
sort of trying to operate along those lines is really interesting to me. And then it becomes like, it becomes the story of, you have your central tether to Earth or whatever, and everything else that you're collecting is just actually wrapping around that one. You know, you're trying ultimately to move all of the tethers to, like, create a rope bridge rather than this single, like, one thing. You know, you're trying to add so many links that the weak one isn't the problem, or won't be a problem even if it snaps, right?
I'm constantly on one about how the difference between what we have on the internet and community is the fact that there is dense connection between people. When you have a real community, everyone in it knows everyone else, and they all care about each other, rather than the spindly connections you get from social media. And so I love thematically capturing that in, like, how do we make these connections dense enough that they hold?
I also think that I'm having just the vision of such a, like, insane play artifact that is, like, you've been building this crazy web between everyone, and, like, scribbling things out and then moving stuff, and, like, I think that's really fun.
A separate sheet that is sort of tracking. It's like the polycule map,
exactly.
but for, like, the tethers.
Okay, have I ever talked to either of you about like, Smallville character creation?
Yes.
I don't know this.
I don't remember. I remember you talking about it, but maybe you couldn't find the thing that you're probably looking for exactly now, because I remember you having to cut off.
Yeah, no, I'm looking for it. I know that I do have it. I don't have it on. I don't have. Okay, all right. So sorry. I'll explain for listeners as I'm searching. So Smallville is a very old, at this point, TTRPG based on the WB show Smallville that has it's based on the Cortex Plus system, and it has a really wonderful character creation system where it is a life path system, so that at every phase you're making certain kinds of decisions about, you know, like maybe you're an alien and you can develop your superpowers, or you're like the jock, and so you develop sort of more mundane abilities. But in addition to that, you're creating a web of relationships that extends not just to in Smallville. It's not just players, but it also is other parts of the setting. So here I'm gonna this is not Smallville. This is my sort of like draft rules that uses the same concept to create a game, to create a group of people who play Truth or Dare. Which is, I think, the highest possible application of this concept. But it's like throughout character, listeners can't see this. I've just shown a simple map. Like it's like a polycule chart. I think that's pretty good, right? Where we have a main character who, in my example, is called Tiffany. Tiffany has a big crush on an NPC named Jill. And Jill has a separate arrow going back to Tiffany, which is that she just thinks that Tiffany is a great tutor. And you build out this map. You can also connect to like places, which can be physical locations or like institutions. And yeah, you wind up with just like really cool play artifacts. And it's very fun. I'm not sure if we'll use that, but it's one of my like, it's like, I feel like it's lost technology, right? Because this game is from like 2006 or 2008 or something. And it's so cool. And I feel like we've never done anything with it.
Bring it back here.
Until my Untitled Truth or Dare game. So, but like anyway, this is all just to say I'm really psyched about the idea of a web. And especially the idea of, it's like everybody has a very weak tether to Earth, right? And you can't make that tether better. But you can, like, if you have enough other connections, it's like that. Going way back, Jess had talked about the idea of that a tether allows you to literally use the resources on somebody else's HUD. Like maybe it's like the only way to get back is the strength of everybody's tether back to Earth together, and that's what brings one person home.
Just one thing I wanted to note was that. You talked about like having to, force everything into like overloading this term. I actually like that because I think creative constraints are very useful. And I think if we have to make all of these things work in that language, the possibility space of this game gets cut down in a way that I think is really good for us.
It does.
We have to ask, how is the input tethers? How is the output tethers? And that gives us a much more constrained design space when we have to design like 15 mini games that could be whatever they want to be. And so again, we can adjust as we go and say this was too limiting, but like I just want to name that I think in the game design process, it's helpful for winnowing. Even if you later abandon it, it's helpful as a creative process tool.
I started by sort of saying like what are the mechanical touch points that character is going to have, and I think we've talked that through a lot, both like literally, but especially thematically, right? Like we've talked about the idea that connection between character, which can take the form of literally sharing traits, is crucial, and also that like the most important or one of the most important stats that people will have are tethers, which are their connections to people and things, like particularly Earth and each other. So what I figure might be useful to do in the time we have left is to zero in on details of some of those things, like what are the actual, other than when I do character when we sit down to do character creation, we have like, stress and willpower or O2 stress and willpower. And there's clearly like a section of the sheet for like tethers. And what else do we have basically? And maybe we'll also have time to get into like, and how do you determine you're starting O2? But like, that's lower priority in my mind. That's sort of like the math of balancing exactly what the final experience is. Because so what strikes me is that you need, I think it's important not to over-determine, right? Like these will not be elves with long backstories. They will be like people who are sort of like a concept and a few traits, right? Understood loosely, like which could be something visual. I forgot who it was who brought up like coin flipping, but that was a great example, right? Of just like a little quirk that somebody has.
Tables time.
Yeah, table time. Satah just looks so excited.
We're gonna have a sound
Everybody,
bite. We're gonna have a music cue every time there's a table. And my ideal episode, you won't be able to hear anyone talk because it's just the tables time music cue over and over and over again.
I'm going to take this opportunity to talk up my co-host. Sata's tables are the best thing I've ever seen in anything ever, in anything that Sata works on. And so I'm excited for tables time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Satah has like personally expanded my appreciation of tables. And tables are great. They really are.
Thank you. Hell yeah. I think that's a big life goal I have is table evangelism. So that's great. That's really good for me. I can check that off. It will never be done, but I can add a check mark to the list.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really drawn to, as you're saying, starting relatively simple, and I really think that one of the things that Jess and I specifically have talked a lot about is character creation is play, right? Like, and this, of course, is not a unique concept, especially when you're getting into GM lists and belonging outside belonging, specifically games. Like, it is play. And I think one of the things I love the idea of in here is because in the movie we learn about other people, there's so much like prompting, right?
Someone literally asks you, tell me about yourself in this way.
Yeah.
Like, what is this true for you?
And so I like the idea that we do start, there's a little bit of a like, I've made some choices and defined some things, but the idea that the first like 45 minutes of play is just essentially collaborative character development while you're like doing little mini games. You're like doing your replace the comm system mini game where you're stacking 3 dice a few times, you know?
Low stakes.
And while you're doing that, you're asking prompts of each other. Either literally being like, what do you like about being up in space? That is a moment I really like and then she just goes, the silence. And I was like, oh girl, uh-oh. But also I get it. Or offering anecdotes, like having a Houston equivalent. I don't think that there's literally a Houston player, but I think that there should be the game should be Houstoning, right? Like the game should be prompting
and people can read
anecdotes.
for Houston. Like a mini game can have Houston text and someone reads for Houston.
Yeah.
And as we move from non-crisis scenarios, probably have more Houston or even none. Like we lose Houston in the same way that we lose Houston in the movie.
Right.
And Houston can come in and out, but like we could utilize that.
That could be an interesting way to like let's not go down this rabbit hole, but like if a rhythm emerges of like that sometimes Houston is like mechanically triggered in some way in early levels and actually helps, like gives substantive help, and then Houston is gone. It's like, oh, I mean, it's just like it is for them.
Are
right?
you tethered to
Where it's
Houston?
like, yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Absolutely. So I think I love this idea. So do you think it's as simple as there's some sort of very minimal prompting, right? Like that there's, I don't know, a list of looks, something like that, right? Like some sort of tool to give you some kind of basis for who this person is that's very minimal. And then you play, the fix the Hubble mini game or whatever it is, right? Like the introductory mini game that doubles as character creation, and that everybody will then have to answer 3 prompts that are like, relatively abstract and could come up with, so you wind up with like, I've got my coin flipping habit, and I have a boyfriend, and this is my first mission, right? Like, and somebody else has a completely different set of descriptors, but they still have sort of a constant number of like maybe they don't have any relationships on Earth that they bother to name, but they have, they've been working to get into NASA for 20 years and like blah, blah, blah. They have their own set of 3 things.
So something you said there about how like we create a very limited number of aspects and then we start developing through play. You also, the way you phrased it got me thinking about the idea of the first minigame maybe not being on a timer so that you get, like, we've talked about at later points things that pause the timer to give you time to like talk and do story and do a lot of these narrative. And I think having to do character creation on a timer sucks a little bit more. And we have the idea of multiple missions before there have to be crisis missions. And so we can have an untimed one that introduces a few simple mechanics and you're creating characters. Then a timed one that introduces even more mechanics, but is not yet a crisis, and adds some fleshing out, but you have a strong character basis. And then we start moving into crisis. We can do these sort of, just like the movie, escalating scenarios. And to get really concrete for a moment, I want to pitch, before you even start a scenario, the only things you know about your character, but the things you do know is, here's my pitch, name, role, which is super important in this movie, is like, all you know when you initially see them is, this is their name, this is what they do. They are a scientist installing a system. They are a veteran astronaut who pilots. They are the assistant astronaut. They are the shuttle pilot of the Explorer. You have name, you have role, you have look, and you have one aspect of your personality. So you have, like, boastful storyteller or nervous this or whatever. And so before we even go into a scenario, you've got those 4 basic elements, just like in the movie. And then you go into a scenario, and that's where you start adding backstory, as you would think about it in a TTRPG sense, is in our very first untimed scenario that you are, you know, installing an upgrade on the Hubble. But the other reason why I say untimed for that is that, I'm just following the movie. Like, this should be a game. It's what we're doing. The timer hasn't started yet. You don't get the debris timer yet. Oh, you don't think so? Because
This is where I disagree.
They come in over the radio and say...
I think... I could easily be swayed to your side. One of the reasons I brought up the idea of timers being a thing from the start is because they are in a very dangerous situation.
No matter
Even
what.
when it's low stakes, even the simple thing of where she like drops a screw and then it nearly like floats away, there is risk there. My pitch would be, it's in a lot of ways functionally the same. There is a timer, there are roles, but at the beginning, it is mathematically impossible for it to be a crisis.
Yes.
Like, you're in the first round, you're on the most outer ring as you're trying to move in or whatever. You roll a d6 plus something, plus the number of events you've already done. And you can there's only a crisis if it's a 12 or above. And you literally can only roll a 6 until something happens, you know? And I think that one of the reasons I like the idea of this is that there's that feeling of like tension. I also do in some ways like the tutorialization of totally. This is a game where you're going to be doing things on a timer. I do think that there is room to start without it. I just would definitely have a strong desire to get it started pretty quickly.
Cool. I think that totally works.
Yeah.
And how do we feel about different scenarios having different timer times? Like,
yeah, definitely.
1 minute per player, 5 minutes per player.
Yeah.
And I think that also then almost certainly does it. It's like, initially I was imagining like it's just the same beat, and I don't know why I was so stuck to that, but I think it gives us also way more flexibility in designing mini games to like have timer amounts be flexible. And I think that totally solves that. Cool.
How do you think that in that, because I think I agree with you completely, Satah, but how do you think that how do you create the vibe where if I'm on an absolute timer, which like as a player passes, okay, here's the thing, dialogue is slow, right? Is what I'm trying to say. That if like that if we're having an improvised conversation or I'm thinking about, you know, an aspect I want to add to my character, that ticks down the timer a lot more than, you know, rolling a die or whatever it is specifically that I have to do. So how do we incentivize people to, or force potentially, to find a point on it, like to do those things as they're completing a task? Or is it just like built into the task that it's like stack these dice and determine your 3 traits in this manner?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways. There is the like, yes, this is just the order of events. You're going to stack things and then you're going to ask a question. There is also an element that I think I brought up in the last episode, which is that the timer isn't going if you're talking.
Got it.
Or at least sometimes you can pause it. You know, as long as you are like discussing, you can pause the timer. And I think that there's also there are aspects in here where, like, one of the things I'll be curious about when we're if we super actively design this out, is just making sure that there's like basic accessibility stuff.
Yeah,
of, like,
totally.
I'm somebody who tends to need more time to do things. Like, I tend to think for a little bit longer. In recording Folio, I always tell people, like, my playthrough was 4 hours long. Yours will almost certainly be 2 hours. Unless you're D, in which case it'll be the same length as mine. But you'll be talking for more of it, whereas most of mine is like, oh, that's interesting. Several beats that I stare at on my editing software every time and go, really? I think what happens. So there's definitely, like, I think I'm interested in designing the most constrained, strict version of this, and then finding the points to relax it on a more human level after. That's at least my sort of, like, what feels like a good path to me, but I'd be curious to know what you think.
We can even also go for an easier game, or like lower pressure game, use this much time per player. For a higher pressure game, use this much time per player. And we can also offer, like, and here's how you modify these scenarios if you need ways to take pressure off. Like, we can offer suggested modifications that say, like, okay, if you're answering a question, you don't actually have to run the timer in this scenario. Put this amount of time on the clock instead. And so we can both play with it in the default design, and we can also offer alternative rule sets for accessibility.
So maybe a way in which to tie a few things together, hopefully, maybe a way in which we can sort of make the initial scenario timed but low pressure is actually that, like, that it is built into it. Like, the way to succeed at it is to, like, I don't know, let's say all three of us have to, we're playing, and all three of us have to stack 3 dice. So when it is Satah's turn, we could just sit here humming and let the clock tick down, or Jess and I could have a fictional conversation and the clock is not ticking. And then, like, that, like, each of those exchanges, there's, like, there's different ways you could do it, right? Like, there could be an explicit prompt. It could be that sort of, like, there could be sort of like a formula you have to get to. Like, I just played A Place to Fuck Each Other recently, which is such a great game by Avery Alder, which always ends with, like, every scene ends with a ritual phrase, right? So if there was sort of, like, every exchange ended with one of a set of ritual phrases, and then that generated your... maybe you kind of see what I'm circling here, right? I'm just thinking about, like Satah stacking dice, Jess and I are talking... having a fictional conversation, and we need some way to focus that in, so every exchange is going to end with one of us writing down, like, I love to, like, flip coins when I'm nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Are we attached to the idea of one timer running from one time for a scenario, or can scenarios interact with time in different ways? And what I mean by that is, what if you have 10 seconds to stack 4 dice. Once it runs out, 2 people need to be talking at all times for you to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone else has to do that. And so, like, Satah is building the dice tower, and they don't get it done in 10 seconds. We give a fairly impossible time. And then the other people have to be, like, because that's what, in the movie, when Kowalski is asking, like, what do you like about space? It's like, we've now entered a higher pressure scenario.
Yeah.
We're going to talk to solve this problem. And so the idea that talking is actually an inevitable fail state, that is how we form the character. So, like, you're stacking dice, you don't get it done in time, you're out of the timer, keep talking until you solve it. Great. Okay, pass that roll to the next person, pass that roll to the next person, until everyone has had some time to talk and add to their character.
So instead of it being, you have 5 minutes to complete the scenario, it becomes everybody has 10 seconds to complete their
stack
thing,
their dice.
You're going to need to artificially prolong that.
Exactly.
Interesting. I like it as an idea. I don't know that it would be fun. Like, I think that it's possible that, like, I think it's such a fun, themey way to do it, and it touches on stuff that we've talked about anyway, but I think especially at the start, I think that it's going against kind of what we were talking about with like lower pressure. Yeah.
Totally.
But I do think that's kind of fun as like
icebox that idea.
One of the first crises that rule
early level crisis
comes in, right? Like something like that I think is a really fun escalation. And there's something really funny about like something bad happened. Let's learn a bunch of stuff about each other real quick. Which like kind of is true, right? Something bad happens and you sure do learn things about people.
Yeah.
That's how real life works as well.
Yeah.
I like that. And so to try and do like an alternative concrete pitch, what if you talked last time, Satah, about having to do a lot of talking while doing things? Mm-hmm. And that is how the sort of initial gravity scene... Oh, I guess... Well, Dora, I think you drew attention to, now that I think about it, the person talking is usually not the person working in the initial scenes.
Until, Sandra Bullock starts to freak out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we... I guess that's a question. And I think it gets at what you were bringing up, Satah, is that are we aiming for low tension the entire way through our character creation scenario? Or are we aiming for starting low tension, moving to something medium tension by the end of that scenario? Are we getting the moment of Sandra Bullock's character starting to freak out? Or is that scenario 2?
I think that it's a separate thing.
Cool.
Because the real... I mean, this is like... I want to be cautious about going too deep on this because I think that this quickly could become literally let's simulate
the movie
gravity exactly, like let's like have that character arc, which is like we want to be a little bit more abstract than that. But one of the things is like we do have in the initial part we have 2 characters in space who are like pretty chill, aggressive, like one of whom is like aggressively chill, and then we have one who is not super happy at any point. And that's okay. And then we we're learning that about them. That's one of the things that we learn about them, right? Like we learn each of these 3 spacewalking astronauts specifically, we learn something about them there. And then there's a board state change. There's a satellite gets exploded. And that to me, I think is we're moving into scenario 2.
Yes.
Because a big event happened.
Pitch that revisits some of our ideas for Houston. You have basically worker astronaut, talker astronaut, and someone reading for Houston or being Houston. And so worker astronaut is doing some sort of dicey activity. Talker astronaut is talking to Houston. So, and then you pass those roles around.
And there's only ever 3 players?
The idea being like within this scenario, you might be, or even it could be worker astronaut, talker astronaut, everyone else is, we talked last time about Apollo 47, voices on the radio. Everyone who is not worker astronaut, talker astronaut is not their character, their voices on the radio. They're Houston, they're engineering, they're other people off screen who are prompting our talker and developing their character and giving them questions. And then we rotate the seat as each person accomplishes their task. It passes left, someone else becomes a worker, someone else becomes a talker, someone else becomes voices on the radio. And everyone has to get their task done within the time period.
I think there's one thing here that I really like, because I'm thinking about like, imagine you have a 5-player game of this, and you have a wide range of both characters and players, right? In terms of how garrulous you are, right? So the thing is that it's really easy to bring out George Clooney's 3 traits during dialogue because he's going to shout them at you constantly. Mm-hmm. It's much harder to get Sandra Bullock's because she, like, notably does not want to share of herself. So I wonder if, like, the role of Houston or of some way of abstracting out a role of, like, I don't know, like, I guess kind of what I'm thinking of is that there is somebody with some measure of authority. It could even be like the mission commander, potentially, if that's a role, has some measure of ownership over the idea of like, I'm going to get your 3 traits out. You know what I mean? Which could be done like scripted through Houston, right? If, I don't know, imagine that like, I'm trying to get down to a mechanism of like exactly how the traits are introduced and determined, right? So what if it was that like the role of Houston or whatever, like the role of the talker in some way moves, and I like that, so that right now, let's say Jess is Houston and I'm like the active astronaut, and I have to complete a task. Like, I do really love this idea of somebody that it's specifically you're working and talking. So when it's my turn, I roll a die, and I get the prompt like, medical has questions about your EKG. Are you feeling nervous? Like, why is that? You know,
Oh.
and then I'm sort of like, I could say, you know, if I was Ryan Stone, I could be like, yeah, I'm just not dealing. It's my first time up here, and I'm not dealing very well with 0G, right? And then I write down on my sheet like first space flight, or you know, that there's specifically a prompt, and we know that once that prompt is spoken, I'm gonna write down my answer, and that's going to be one of my character attributes.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me think about the idea of like, this mini game can be tables, and Houston has tables of questions to ask, and then whatever task the worker and talker in this version of it is completing doesn't have to, but like when I'm creating a character, I don't want to answer a question from nothing. I want something to work off of. And so, okay, I've got to stack 4 dice. The 4 dice I stack have to be the same number. I have to roll a number and then get 4 others with the same number. And the number that I roll for my tower also determines... this scenario comes with another table that is like, why are you nervous? And then there's a nervous table, and it's, I'm feeling sick. I don't like space. I want to be done already.
I lied on my resume.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so the work that you are doing, the task, actually also determines your answer via something on the rulebook.
And definitely like in a very interpretable way, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
Give people guidance, but leave a lot of generative space for what that means.
Yes. 100%.
I like that a lot.
There was a phrase, I don't remember which of you said it, but one of you said just the phrase boastful storyteller. And I love the idea that a lot of stuff about characters is that kind of construction. Like we're learning like boastful storyteller, cocky pilot, nervous librarian, whatever, you know, like that we're learning these little, and sometimes we might only learn half of a phrase at a certain point and that kind of thing. Like that's sort of more broad, but just like thinking of like when we're thinking of what answers the game is giving, I like the idea of like something shaped like that.
It makes me think a little of the way that that things are constructed in Fiasco, actually, right? Like the idea that so I roll a 4, and we know, like, so if I'm Houston, I know that, like, you know, first of all, I know that I'm, you know, whatever, rebooting the comm chip, and you in Houston know that you're now going to ask about family. And then there's like another role that comes in and says like your contentious relationship with your family, something like that, or like your loving family, you know, whatever it is. Okay, so then the sort of like the rhythm of character creation becomes that there is, you know, whoever's the mission commander, which is maybe one of the roles that we get assigned before we even go into the scenario, starts as Houston. Like the first player, you know, the player to their left, whatever language you want to use there, makes their roll, and they roll a 3, and now they have to roll, like, the timer's clicking down, and they have to roll all 3s and stack their dice. And that 3, and maybe specifically, maybe they need to make 2 dice stacks. Okay, like, this is the one thing, maybe this is what makes it a complete thing. So my I have to stack 3 dice and then 3 dice, and I roll a 3, and that tells me something about what I'm doing. It also tells Houston about what my prompt will be, And then when we improvise some conversation, and when I do my second die, that sort of like fills in a second piece of conversation. And we do some more conversation about that as Houston's talking to me about it. And at the end, I write down boastful storyteller, beloved wife, like veteran astronaut, whatever it is.
One way we can also do that is that, like, I'm trying to also make sure, I'm starting to think mechanically, like, it needs to go on long enough. The task they do has to take enough time to be talking about stuff. And so now I'm thinking about, so you roll your first die, you get your initial prompt from that die roll, and then and I'm getting really nitty gritty here, but I think it's time to.
Yeah, I agree.
You roll your second die, the first result you get determines what you're going to talk about. Now keep rolling until you get the same result while you're talking.
Yeah.
And then third die adds another detail. It adds another word to these, like, this word cloud, right? Like, each die, the first time you roll it, you get a new detail, but then you have to keep rolling until you get the same number. And that provides the time.
Why? Like I get what I'm asking is, like, what does that mean? Like,
yes.
Yeah, why do you want the same number?
So the immediate thing that comes to mind is you are aligning a component. They all have to be aligned in the fiction. The other thing that we can do is it can depend on your question and scenario. Like, depending on how much we want to put in the minigame, it can be, you rolled a 3. Why are you blank? You need to blank. And then whatever that task is, we can do a bunch of things that make sense for getting the same number. It can be, you have to read off the serial number. You need to align the comms array.
So that totally makes sense. What for the exposition-y, feelings-y part? Does that tie in some way?
Yeah, interesting. Aiming for the sort of narratives, or the mechanics also driving home the narrative here. So what starts coming to mind there is, like, egosyntonic. Is that the word I'm looking for? Like, finding yourself by having all the same numbers. You're trying to develop a coherent sense of self. Like, I don't know how we then deliver that in the mechanics, but that's thematically what I start working with when you ask that.
I think that I might go the direction, or suggest going the direction of, like, separating it a little bit more. Like, having the dice in front of you only be about the task you're doing.
Yes.
There is a certain amount. I think I'm interested in getting as much information out of the dice as possible. I think that a lot of this conversation is really difficult because it's quite abstract and we don't actually have content written for, like, what it means. I just, like, I want stuff to mean things, and, like, when you start talking about, like, rolling the same number, that makes a lot of sense for me for the task. But then I lose track of, like, why at that point we're tying the two of them together, other than the fact that both are happening at the same time. And so I'm curious, like, where the most satisfying sort of, like, separation and delineation of, like, why are these happening at the same time, other than the fact that it's, like, you're existing, you know?
That can come from Houston rolling too, which also just makes our tasks easier as far as developing separate tables. The maths don't have to all work together.
No, that's exactly what I was thinking, right? Because if you think about it as, like, D the astronaut needs to align the flux capacitor, and Houston needs to resolve this medical question, right? Mm-hmm. And so, like, they have separate roles. Like, they're working on separate jobs at the same time.
Yeah.
So I roll a 3, and that tells me what I'm doing. Or I could just make it up. We can just say, choose from this list and keep rolling. And meanwhile, like, Houston, another player is having the experience, which is gameplay, I think, and, like, pretty interesting gameplay of rolling, like, okay, like, I'm going to ask you this question, and it's like your answer is going to give us this kind of trait.
I wonder if part of, like, something that might be helpful here is, like, if there is a Houston player who's asking this question, I wonder if sometimes they aren't asking a specific person. Like, they're saying, ooh, I'm seeing a pretty rough readout. Are you nervous? And then the rest of the players are get in that moment, decide who is nervous. You know what I mean?
I love
and so
that.
it's like,
I actually love it.
And they become the task doer as well in the process?
I think everybody's doing tasks, right? Everybody has to be doing something at all times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Except Houston? And then Houston rotates?
Can I make a pitch actually on that? Because I really like what you're saying, Seda. So maybe instead of Houston, we enshrine the role, since we've talked about the idea of people going into the first scenario with a role, that in any game you're going to have a mission commander, and the mission commander has a special task in the first mini game, which is that they are the person who is doing this. Mm-hmm. So they assign out, they explain to everybody, they like literally read the game rules, like, everybody, we're just going to be stacking dice, we have 5 minutes, whatever it is, and I will be asking questions, and you will have to decide if I won't try to word phrase it correctly, but like you will have to claim your question until the last person just gets the last question. So everybody's sitting here doing their dice towers, and then I say, like, hey, your heart rate's spiking. Are you feeling okay? And then Sada's player is like, or Sada, who is the player, is like, oh, I'm going to jump on that. Like, I'm fine, right? And then, like, that leads to the trait.
Yeah.
I love that.
Everybody, I like, claiming the question, I think is really fun.
It's great, yeah.
And it gives everybody, like, there's a little bit more, like, your character isn't just being defined for you. And you can like, follow what makes sense and, like, pass things around a little bit. I think that's really fun. And, yeah, so then it sounds like everybody sort of comes out of this scenario, whatever the, like, trigger of the ending of it is, whether that's time running out or you've rolled 50 dice. And so now we're, like, moving on. We go into it, like, having a set amount of traits written down about everybody, including some, like, weird little quirk or something, and then sort of, like, the crisis begins. And there's still, I imagine, occasional prompts for, like, we're learning more about each other, we're like, connecting, and then the mini games start even more, right? And then it sort of, like, fuddles in, and a bunch of people die, and then one person makes it back, and we know a bunch about them, and they also very much, like, carry physically almost the memories of the rest of their crew in their, like, journey back to Earth.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I love this.
It's a great structure. And I don't even have time. I wanted to be like, let's talk about what tethers are for 20 minutes. But this is the mercilessness of the game design process, everybody. Sometimes you just run out of time.
Sometimes you have a deadline and it has to get out.
That's right, yeah.
Well, okay. I love everything that we came up with here. I'm really excited to, like, do the real unifying work of the, like, overall structure and then the much more defined space that we spent time in today. I think that this is shaping up to be something really, really cool. Dee, thank you so much for joining us, for being our second guest. This has been incredible.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for a very interesting discussion and a chance to rewatch this movie, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And thanks for doing, like, a cool, weird podcast. This is like, I've always felt like Folio was just a really novel format and a really interesting approach to actual play, and it's cool to be a part of another podcast that is doing cool stuff with format and pushing our sense of what TTRPG podcasts do.
Yay. That's my favorite thing to do, it turns out.
Yeah, for real.
When Seda brought me this idea, I was like, oh my god, this is brilliant. That's rules.
Yippee.
Yeah.
If you want to just, like, let everyone know, Dee, what you're up to, anywhere they can find you online, anywhere you want to direct them to.
Yeah, so I am at Queen Regnant on Bluesky, which is my main social media. deecity.itch.io are my games, and then you can also see my work at galpalgames.itch.io.
Jess, any plugs?
Yeah, so as I said up top, you can find me online everywhere as jessfrom.online, or my games as Jumpgate Games. I recently released a game called The Vatican Stole the Menorah, and We're Gonna Steal It Back. Shitposty Jewish game about stealing the menorah back from the Vatican, a little heist one-pager. So check that out if you haven't. You can find all my other games there as well. But yeah, other than that, you can find all my stuff online, and thank you for listening.
Yeah, I've been Satah. You can check out my Bluesky at posatachips.gaygothvibes.online. You can find my website at gaygothvibes.online, and you should go join the Haunted Table Patreon at $3 or above to get the House Edge, which is our Triangle Agency Fist Ultra Edition crossover roguelike time travel card crawl. Love the Haunted Table crew very much. I think that's about it. And this, of course, has been This Should Be a Game, the podcast about when you say, this should be a game.
This should be a game.
This should be a game.
Beautiful. Follow the show on Bluesky at thisshouldbeaga.me and join our Discord at discord.thisshouldbeaga.me to talk games with us. Support the show financially on Patreon to vote for the genres and movies we cover, send in audio messages for mechanical mailbag episodes, and read the notes we take while watching stuff for the show. Thank you to Cris Viana for the logo and Nicky Flowers for the theme song. Both of them are linked in the show notes, as well as any games we referenced in our discussions. See you next week for the Hosts Only Part 3.
Also, I'm so sorry for the villain underlighting that I've switched to. I didn't prepare for the sun
It is
going
very
down.
villainous.
My laptop is lighting me over here, and then I didn't have enough light, so I turned on my phone light. But that's I'm getting the villain underlighting.
You're lucky. It's an audio medium. They'll never know.